Hello, dear friends. We're sincerely glad to greet you again. And today we're going to talk with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, in our previous video, we touched upon the topic of thoughtlessness. And today I would like to begin our conversation precisely with this topic. The thing is that very many people devote almost their entire lives to achieving this state of thoughtlessness, and some say that they even succeed in this, except that there is a problem that they do not manage to stay in this state of thoughtlessness for a long time. Although consciousness sometimes doubts, did this experience actually happen? Because who in us is saying, right now I'm not thinking anything, or right now I don't have a single thought? Is this fact stated by personality, or is this actually a thought? And then it turns out that the person spends his whole life chasing thoughts back and forth, running away from these thoughts and driving them away. Meanwhile, he might never have gained the experience of thoughtlessness, as it turns out. The question is the following: is it possible to experience this state of thoughtlessness here, in this world, to gain this very experience of thoughtlessness, which many people basically chase after in different religions and in various religious teachings? Is this experience of thoughtlessness possible here?
You know, I can answer wisely and intelligently. But may I tell you a joke? A young electrician comes to a factory, and as always, the old ones start making fun of the young one. They say, "This device doesn't work, it has run out of electricity." They give him a bucket and say, "Go to the foreman and ask him for half a bucket of electricity." It's the same here, you see? Friends of mine, what does the experience of thoughtlessness mean? In order to figure this out, we need to expand on it a little bit, so that we do not run for electricity with a bucket. I haven't seen a single person who would be able to stop thoughts in a controlled way. Even when a person is in the deepest practice, when he has stopped all his thoughts, he has three markets in his head at the same time, all at once. A Chinese,
A Cairo one, maybe a Turkish one.
including the Turkish one, right?
Right.
And this is normal. Why? Because to stop thoughts means that you yourself get away from them, while thoughts will always swarm. There is the circle practice, do you remember? We described it.
Sure.
I hope our friends remember too. So, the principle of this practice is very simple. Everything is pushed out of the circle. Sort of the territory is cleared for thoughtlessness, while all thoughts remain outside. Otherwise, like you said, it turns out who actually evaluates whether you have thoughts or not. And a person is sitting in practice. Yes, that's it, there are no thoughts, I have stopped them. Yet, what is this?
What is this? Who detects it? Personality, or is it a thought?
Who detects it and who says that?
Right.
Of course, the point is that personality doesn't have thoughts in our habitual understanding. Those who, let's say, have attained the observation from personality know that it is different. It is a comprehensive and general understanding of a situation. Personality doesn't talk. It simply perceives everything as it is. There is understanding, there is total control, it's all-encompassing, and immediately there is a question, an answer, and a solution, let's say, all at once. But when we observe from the position of primary consciousness, in this case, primary consciousness is trying to quiet down secondary consciousness, and there starts this marketplace indeed. Or even three marketplaces. Simultaneously, a lot of thoughts like, have I stopped thoughts? Have I not stopped thoughts? People fixated on that, and they struggle all their lives trying to achieve thoughtlessness. If we have stopped thoughts completely, we get into a state of either deep spiritual practice or a state of deep sleep, and that's it. Everything else is either pictures or some whispering, or some talks. Yes, it is possible to reduce them to a large extent, but it requires concentration and effort. However, there still remains control, let's say in that very meditative practice, from primary consciousness. Well, if someone says, that's it, I get rid of thoughts, I have no thoughts, I'm sitting in practice, who tells him that? What makes him think that he has no thoughts? A simple question. Who has evaluated that? Well, it's...
Who controls this process?
Yes, it's kind of a joke. It has been used since ancient times. And teachers have always told their disciples about this. They forced them to achieve that. There's its own positive aspect of why teachers forced their disciples to achieve thoughtlessness and complete peace. A person tries, he doesn't succeed, and he tries even more. Well, those who came accidentally, they just say, completely useless, I don't succeed in anything. Again, those very thoughts, right? And they give up and leave. I mean, such people are not worth spending time on. They're outsiders. They have a different goal and task. They won't comprehend. While there are people who try hard, so when they try hard, time passes. A teacher observes a disciple, and then he begins to give more or less normal practices and to explain what is what.
There is another point regarding thoughtlessness. Many people say, I concentrate on the glassy surface of a lake, and there is the glassy surface of a lake, but there is no immersion into love.
Well,
what is the purpose of the practice of the glassy surface of a lake? What is it?
I will explain. This is the most ancient practice. It has always been used. A person visualizes in his head a lake with a perfectly glassy surface, and any thought is reflected like a wave made by a thrown stone. So a person should attain such a state. With the help of what does he attain this? This is meditative autogenic training. I'll introduce such a new term, There's autogenic training. It is when we say our arm is heavy. Again, we learn to control our bodies by means of consciousness. Everyone will sort of say, I know how to control my body. I do what I want. Okay, but when you start doing autogenic training, you realize that you don't know anything. You don't know how to do it, and the body doesn't obey you. And at this very point, owing to your consciousness, in this case, primary consciousness is used, it becomes disciplined. And a person gradually learns to control his body. At the same time, he learns to invest his attention in a certain goal, in a task, without distraction, but his consciousness works in this direction. His attention goes precisely in this direction. This is the work of consciousness with the body. There is another level, it is higher. Those are meditative practices. It is when with the help of our consciousness, in this case our primary consciousness, we discipline secondary consciousness. This is also very significant, and precisely in meditative practices we master different energy flows. We learn to feel that which we do not usually perceive. We expand our abilities, the abilities of our bodies. That's really good, but it is not spiritual practice. And the next stage is already spiritual practice. Spiritual practice, no matter what practice we do, at the beginning it is still performed with consciousness. Consciousness is attached, so our goal and task is to get away from our consciousness and dive as deep as possible. And when we get away from our consciousness, that's where a really deep spiritual practice begins.
This is so interesting.
Then there are no thoughts. Then there is nothing. Why? Because such a feeling arises that you have started performing practice, but then you wake up.
Igor Mikhailovich, this is also an interesting point. People say, some experienced people share that after they come out of spiritual practice, they cannot describe what was happening there, that consciousness doesn't remember what was happening there. And there is the following question, is this really so, or is it actually some advanced level of performing spiritual practice?
A normal level of performing spiritual practice, normal. Let me explain. As for the advanced level, we will probably come up to it today, while this is a normal level. It is when you come out of practice and your consciousness doesn't know what was happening there. Why? As soon as we come out of practice, consciousness becomes active. That is, our personality reconnects with consciousness again. And consciousness cannot remember because it wasn't there. This is a correctly performed practice. However, many people simply fall asleep. Well, this is different, friends. If you fall asleep in practice, it is radically different.
Exactly.
There are nuances here too.
What is the difference? How can a person understand, let's say he feels good now because he had a good and deep spiritual practice, or he simply
Had a good sleep.
had a wonderful sleep and switched a little
Well,
bit?
I'll put it as follows, if we consider it from the perspective of psychology and practices as entertainment, but not as a true spiritual path, there is nothing wrong if a person had a rest and a good sleep, right? His mood has sort of improved. That's already good.
Well, it would be still desirable to master spiritual practices.
Yes, if we take this as a spiritual practice, the difference is huge. When a person wakes up, there is a certain phase, meaning in practice itself, he can also see cartoons at the moment of transition. Well, a dream is a dream. At the moment of coming out of practice, a dream switches on, and a person wakes up. He wakes up as usual, as they say. He wakes up in practice. Yes, the body may get stiff or something else, that sort of thing. But when a person comes out of a true practice, he doesn't remember either his name or anything else, and he has to apply an effort. And this is distinctive here, in order to even connect this consciousness. Primary consciousness connects automatically. And at this point, at the level of primary consciousness, you don't even know your name, or where you are, or who you are. And you need time to adapt, but you feel so wonderful, so good inside. You don't want to come out of practice at all. This is also properly performed practice. Well, you understand, your biological clock is telling you that you already need to come out. Again, I'll go a little ahead of myself and say that even in a properly and deeply performed practice, there is no total disconnection from primary consciousness. It is preserved, but solely with primary consciousness, not with the secondary one. There is a huge difference here too. However, you still make a lot of effort. But at the same time, there is a tremendous replenishment, a feeling of vivacity, not the one you have after sleep. Any sleep gives you relaxation, oppression, while here it is different. You rediscover your body anew, and you really begin to feel your body anew every time. Well, again, you always want to go into practice. A spiritual practice that is performed correctly, even once, and gives a much greater contact than usual in our daily life. When we are not in practice, but we continue this inner dialogue with the spiritual world, an exchange of love, energy, our attention, no matter what you call it, but it's continuous contact, a continuous dialogue, without words, via perception through feelings. So during practice it is several times more intense, and during the day you just walk around and one part of you craves to go into practice. In the literal sense of the word, that's a correctly performed practice. Even after the first real contact in spiritual practice, it's impossible to part with it. It is...
Igor Mikhailovich, then what is people's fear of going to this depth of diving connected with? Because many people describe that they face fear, and afterwards they probably imitate that they are performing spiritual practice. Because once faced with some sense of panic or fear, they deceive themselves and do not immerse deeper.
Well, it's not them who deceive, it is consciousness that deceives. Consciousness always deceives. I emphasize, it is secondary consciousness, or an undisciplined primary consciousness can also do that. Before the practice itself, a person begins to experience a fear of falling, a fear of death, whereas some people even ask questions. They say, how is that if I start performing the practice and suddenly I will leave?
Exactly.
Right? I mean...
At once. You feel that some sort of disconnection is taking place.
Yes, I'm such a bodhisattva. That's right, during the first practices.
In the third week.
In the third week, right. I'll just leave for that world, but I still have so much to do, right?
Yes, there is a huge responsibility.
Of course.
There is a family, children.
Yes, I haven't finished eating my sandwich.
I'll leave and only slippers will be left.
And someone will wear them.
Probably.
Right. And such thoughts in a person's head prevent him from performing the practice correctly. Moreover, there is fear from consciousness. First of all, consciousness cannot immerse there. When a person has already gained an experience and already feels even this very light contact, he should perform practice. He needs to go deeper. He feels that he can immerse. But there is fear, like a fear of the ocean depth, especially if a person is afraid of the depth when He swims and there are whole kilometers underneath him where there are megalodons or something else swimming, some terrible huge dinosaurs. So there is this very creepiness, fear of the dark or something else, but who experiences that? It is consciousness that experiences it. Why? Because for consciousness, so that it can somehow be drawn into spiritual practice, well, I'll give an associative example of what our consciousness experiences, and everything becomes clear from that. Just imagine, friends. There is a blast furnace, a huge red-hot furnace, and you go in there, you in your body. Would you go there? Well, excuse me, you won't go there, even at gunpoint. Why? Because it is better to be simply shot than… Before you even get there, you start burning. Isn't that true? The same is with our consciousness. It cannot penetrate there in any way. Therefore, it cannot enter there. It experiences enormous fear of that. Plus, those are losses. Consciousness immediately calculates how much it has been robbed of, how much less it has received. After all, consciousness has to pay tribute, In order to understand this, you should really study physics, the true physics of this world. You should observe what's going on and study what consciousness is, how it interacts with this world, and who you are as a human in general. You should truly study all this, rather than play around and listen to what those who are far from it tell you. Then you will understand how consciousness works, why it doesn't want to and cannot get into that world. Because an interaction even with a slightly higher concentration of that very Allat, that very love, is destructive for the field structure of our consciousness. It is simply destructive, and it will never get there. That is why, no matter how much we try to push consciousness in there, well, that's what many people actually do. I am consciousness, and I should penetrate there by means of my consciousness. After all, that's how it is in meditations.
Yes.
What do we actually do in meditations? We exactly work with our consciousness, and everything is focused on it there, on subjective sensations of the body through consciousness, through everything.
Yes, concentration, this very control.
Of course. There is meditative work with primary consciousness, there is work with secondary consciousness. Well, in this case, it is spiritual practice and disconnection. That's why this fear arises. And consciousness is afraid. How? It experiences a fear of death, moreover, of that death, which is called the second death for subpersonality, you see? That very abyss, which subpersonalities are very, very afraid of, is the cessation of existence. Consciousness is extremely afraid of that. So it throws in mindsets to personalities such as, now a disconnection will take place, you will dive in, but are you ready to appear before God right now? And what about your family, loved ones, and sandwich which you haven't finished eating, and Coca-Cola that you haven't finished drinking? And there are many other problems in this world, right?
Well, in fact, the entrance into practice only begins after that, right?
In fact, it's a primary experience.
Exactly.
Friends of mine, it's impossible to dive into practice and disappear somewhere. First of all, it doesn't do any harm to your body.
Right.
A practice that is properly performed doesn't affect either psyche or anything else. Why? Because on the contrary, consciousness calms down. You break away from it. That doesn't harm in any way. It's like sleeping. For the body, from a purely physiological point of view. For our consciousness, for our psyche, from the psychological point of view, it is just a rest. As for replenishment with power that we gain after spiritual practice, and indeed a correctly performed spiritual practice fills us very much. What do we actually perform it for? For becoming stronger, for getting closer to the spiritual world, because in no way in our everyday life, with our active consciousness, will we be able to attain this bliss at such a level. For that, someone should go ahead and give you this power, just like that. You see, then you can feel it. While in spiritual practice, you do it yourself. You yourself contribute to a much greater amount coming to you than you give. And later on, during the day, you return this greater amount. It is clear that partially, whether you want to or not, and no matter how mature you are, you will give a certain percentage to your consciousness. You live anyway, and it distracts you anyway. You cling to some thought somewhere, or consciousness forces you to worry about something. Yet, what is worrying? Again, it means to give away your life. That's the point.
Igor Mikhailovich, should one rely on the experience of other people in spiritual practices? Some people describe that in every practice, for instance, they approach some so to say, film and feel that there is something greater behind it. And every time they try to pass through this film, they try to overcome this barrier. They keep accumulating power during the day, and then this film appears again in practice, and they try to pass through it again. So the question is the following: how to overcome that barrier? And the second question, or perhaps, is it enough just to be in the feeling of deep love and this process will flow somehow naturally by itself?
Well, I'll put it as follows. Of course, an association arose in my mind about those films, but I won't voice it. Some people do have such subjective perceptions from consciousness. And this very sensation of a soap bubble which...
Just a little bit more and you are...
Just a little bit more, yes, and the world will simply open up right in front of you and so on. All this happens at the level of consciousness. At the level of personality, there are no such effects. There are other experiences when, as you say, people just go through love. There is nothing. You know, it's just kind of a state of being under the ceiling. The only thing that is in the way is the ceiling. Otherwise, you would fly up, you know, that kind of thing. But this is actually the experience of other people. It is different for everyone. Everyone follows their path. And subjective sensations, I'll call them so, which occur as a result of the work of consciousness and the evaluation of your actions by consciousness. Well, this is really so. It is consciousness that evaluates that. This state is different for almost everyone if you make up for yourself the state of this thin film.
In every practice.
So it will be in every practice because you've heard from someone and you consider this to be correct.
Yes.
At this point, consciousness will give you those thin films. And you will spend entire days fighting some films, you see. After all, you are not a little-tailed cell to fight inside that piece of rubber. This is wrong, friends. There shouldn't be any mindsets or any limits. There should simply be an aspiration, so to say. And there will be everything.
And when people see various colors, some energies intertwining, is it a spiritual practice or is it consciousness deceiving a person?
In spiritual practice, there cannot be tricks of this kind, whereas in meditative practices, these phenomena are exactly present.
Right.
And sometimes, I would say, those are not just tricks of consciousness. Sometimes, indeed, in true meditative practices, all this is natural. We carried out a lot of experiments. And we don't even mention the experience of many millions of people who went through this over the entire history and described such things. While we talk about real experiments that we ourselves conducted, this is confirmed it's a real physical perception of the real...
subtle world.
Absolutely right. This is physics. It really exists, and it is confirmed. This is true. Well, the goal and task in spiritual practice and in meditative practice are exactly the opposite. Although, as a rule, the forerunner of spiritual practice is meditative practice.
Igor Mikhailovich, there is also another question. Is it possible to gain life during practice? And how does the transition from the sixth to the seventh dimension take place? For instance, a person accumulates a lot of powers, love during the day, then he immerses into practice and reaches a certain verge where he needs to make this very choice and, tentatively speaking, at a certain point of this transition, he makes a decision, should I pass into the seventh dimension or not?
Tatiana, may I ask you and our friends a question right away? By what means will you make this decision there? At what level? After all, for that you need consciousness. In order to perceive everything this way and describe it so colorfully, right? Or you should be at a higher stage, when at the level of personality, you perceive yourself as we habitually perceive ourselves, at the level of our consciousness, isn't that so? But it's impossible to jump over several stages in development. You may consider it as several lifetimes, right? What can you do?
Does anyone there open the wicket between the sixth and the seventh dimension?
Exactly. You mentioned the wicket.
With a question, so are you ready?
You come and immerse very deep into meditative practice, or rather into a spiritual one, sorry friends, into spiritual practice. And then you find yourself in a glade, where some man in a woman's dress is standing with a bundle of keys, saying that he's a cool guy, and it depends solely on him whether he will open the wicket for you or not, right? He opens some book, starts counting, takes out an ancient abacus. He's an ancient man after all.
Whether you're worthy.
Yes, he starts counting and weighing your sins. Then he will either let you into heaven or not. My friend, you would run away after seeing this man in your
In a deep spiritual practice.
illusory world. Right.
Igor Mikhailovich, is it possible to actually gain life in spiritual practice, in the process of spiritual practice?
Of course not. Never will a person through spiritual practice, well, it's ambiguous here. It is precisely thanks to spiritual practice that a person gains life.
Right.
But in spiritual practice, exactly in practice, you won't be able to enter the spiritual world, friends. Let me explain.
While consciousness draws the opposite. Some people say that the full merging of personality with the soul definitely happens exactly in deep spiritual practice, when there is no...
Solely in practice. Huh? Consciousness says so.
Yes, that you need to delve much deeper, and in this very state, the merging of personality with the soul takes place.
I'll put it this way. This is what many teachers told their disciples in ancient times. Well, why deny it? I also explained it this way, that you should achieve it precisely in practice. Achieve it in practice. Well, that's motivation.
But not gain life after all.
It is motivation.
Right.
You see, a person should strive for that. It is true, in practice a person can come very close to this door. But I didn't say that he can come in. You see, I mean, it's a huge difference. In order for a human to really enter the spiritual world during his lifetime, a full disconnection is needed, which happens only in sleep. Yes, friends.
Sleep is a little death, as Buddha called it, and it is also mentioned in Islam.
Absolutely right. Every time we fall asleep, we die, and then we resurrect again. A human has to go through this little death. That's the only way, through sleep. No, there is actually an option. I'm giving a hint. A spiritually developed person becomes so tired in practice that instead of performing practice, he eventually falls asleep. Well, naturally. But friends, it's actually not a practice, it is sleep anyway, right? But the intentions were to perform the practice. In that case, yes, it is possible.
As you once said, it's important for this disconnection between personality and consciousness to occur.
Of course.
And it doesn't occur in practice.
In practice, a partial connection with primary consciousness still remains. Well, you cannot perform it any other way. It won't work any other way. Right, it's a full disconnection for personality. Yes, when we come out, we feel, perceive and understand those processes which took place, but we do not remember. There are no pictures of those actions, of some temples where you rest and talk to Dalai Lamas or someone else, with Jesus Christ and everyone else. There are no such things. This exists in dreams, pictures from the devil, it's easy. In real work, there is no such thing. And that's what Holy Fathers went through when performing the Jesus prayer already at serious deep stages, when it already becomes a heartfelt prayer, but not a verbal prayer and not in mind. The same effects, only it is much more complicated even than the circle practice.
Igor Mikhailovich, when a person wakes up in the morning, does he realize that he has gained life?
No.
Do his spiritual practices
No.
or the work of consciousness change somehow?
Yes, there are changes, there are differences, but they are so, let's say, imperceptible at the first stages, and there is an explanation for why this is so. In extremely rare cases, a person realizes this immediately, in the rarest cases. In extremely rare cases, a person wakes up, as a rule that happens at dawn, with a tremendous surge of clarity and understanding that he has gained life. This is an extremely rare phenomenon, and it is spontaneous. Most often, as it happens to many people already after sleep, after gaining this life, maybe even a year or two later, in some emergency situation, a person realizes that he is alive. he realizes that he is so detached from his body and from his consciousness. And that's when an understanding comes to him that he's been alive for a long time already. You see? In such a case, yes, both wisdom and understanding come, but that's already sort of the next stage. So why do we not realize? Why and I would even say for what is such a mechanism embedded for us not to stop? We continue to grow, we continue to do our best while being already alive. In this way, a person can go through many stages during his lifetime and, as you and I already discussed many times, even become a bodhisattva, my friends. Well, frankly speaking, after several stages, when a person is still far from being a bodhisattva, he already understands that he is alive, and a lot of things have already changed for him. At that point, a choice already takes place. In that state, a person can choose whether to leave or to stay. In extremely rare cases, as I already said, a person has clarity right away, but in this case, consciousness has to be incredibly disciplined, you see. Very few people are able to discipline everything to such an extent as to see it instantly. As they say, you wake up in the morning and you already clearly know that you are already alive. As a rule, yes, there are certain patterns, so to say. Well, I believe there is no point in voicing all of them. Why? Because consciousness will begin to play along and stop people in their spiritual development. But I'll put it as follows, my friends. As soon as a person gains life, his craving for spiritual practice increases many times over. This is the first sign of gaining life. However, exactly the same thing happens when a person begins to succeed in spiritual practices. After the first contact, in the simplest spiritual practice, a person is already attracted. He cannot do without it. He thinks about it all day long. I'll give you an association. Imagine that you like coffee. Well, I don't know. What kind of coffee do you like, Tatiana?
Balanced Arabica.
Balanced Arabica. And you love it so much that you even sense its smell, okay? So wherever you are, you want to immediately go buy a cup of coffee and drink it, right? And you cannot live without drinking that coffee 5 or 10 times a day. I'm just giving an example. Have you imagined that? So it's the same with spiritual practice, only everything is multiplied by 1,000,000 times. It's a total addiction like that of a drug addict, in fact. Like an addict needs to take a drug, he has a craving. That's all he thinks about.
And to increase the dose.
Yes, so after the first correctly performed spiritual practice, a person becomes sort of a spiritual addict. There's no other way to call it. Why? Because the longing for this feeling of the spiritual world indeed becomes so strong that during the day, whatever you do, but most of the time you think about this anyway, you attain this love anyway and you give it back. Eventually, there comes a state, a moment, when this exchange of one's love, one's attention becomes so strong. This is, you know, like two rivers that flow one way and the other way. One meets the other and they do not mix. And the circulation only increases. The rivers becomes wider, deeper and faster. And it is such a mesmerizing process that fills you with life, and you feel this even at the physical level. And the most interesting thing is that, yes, you feel this even at the physical level, and consciousness becomes at such moments so much quieter. It becomes cowardly and quieter. You physically feel that your consciousness becomes subdued. But that occurs even after the first true practices. And when you keep them up and amplify them, you get used to that. At the same time, there is a constant desire for increasing and deepening this process. Well, when you gain life, having such an experience, you won't notice a big difference. Yes, there are nuances. Well, you know how it is. Unfortunately, consciousness is capable of fantasizing a lot of things for us. Shaitan is cunning, therefore, so as not to strengthen his positions and not to weaken the positions of our friends. You don't need subtle nuances, you will see for yourselves, friends. And God grant that more and more people learn and face this every morning. right?
Yes, Igor Mikhailovich, you correctly said that consciousness can play on this very point
Right.
and say, see, you woke up in the morning, just look how alive you are.
Yes.
You are not dead anymore, you are no longer dead, but there is life in you. How can a person distinguish whether it deceives him or not?
It's elementary. 2 or 3 days of euphoria, and that's it. You again have a lot of problems, and you're in slavery to Shaitan. Whereas if you have gained life, you will never be in slavery to him again. Never. And you will never act in such a way or do that which contradicts your already alive essence. You won't value your body as much as you did before. No one and nothing will make you cross the line, because angels never fall. And this is true.
This very stability appears.
Not only stability, but also life.
Igor Mikhailovich, in order to attain this life, one definitely needs love. So people say that when they share their feelings after spiritual practice, some of them call it big love, others call it aspiration. They say that I feel aspiration, and they say, as soon as I've realized that my consciousness interprets this as aspiration, I've heard that people feel love. It means I've been experiencing something wrong. What is love in general?
You know, it's very difficult to explain what love is to someone who doesn't know it. This is really so. How many times have we tried to explain it, right?
Yes.
Until a person has profoundly felt what love truly is. Well, again, in our everyday life, guided by Shaitan, we perceive love differently. It is some kind of dependence on a person, or when he depends on you. Those are also chemical reactions, I mean hormonal ones, in the body. But they are short-lived and do not last long. It is also a habit and conveniences. It's some kind of, let's say, harmonious relationships with people, you know, that is also called love. But at the same time, everyone remains selfish and thinks only of oneself. You know, it's like they have lived together all their lives, and let's say a husband dies, and a woman laments, oh my God, how could you leave me alone? What am I going to do? How am I going to live without you now? Who will take out the garbage, you see? I'm translating it verbatim. That's all, and what did it all rest upon? On selfishness and convenience. Why? Because we complete each other, it is comfortable for us. We have harmony, and we call it love, don't we?
Such a symbiosis
Of course.
of coexistence.
Of course. Well, what is true love? That love which we are supposed to create, to generate, it is divine love. It is not just our attention. No. I would say it's an investment of our attention in genuine bliss. That's exactly what gives a feeling of true love later on. But when we begin to feel reciprocal love from the spiritual world, it cannot be confused with anything. Can we call it light? You know, even if we call it the brightest light in the world, we will just dim it. It cannot be compared to anything. To say that it's the brightest colors is like blurring those colors. It is life. It's difficult to describe it, it's better to feel it. But it's impossible to confuse it. There is nothing in this world, even close, that could compare to true, genuine love. However, when we invest our attention in this bliss and transfer this bliss with our attention to the spiritual world, every moment, every, I would say, millisecond, we generate and send most of our attention with our bliss, with our inner aspiration to a single goal, then after a while, we certainly feel it coming from there. That which is called love, divine love, cannot be gained for nothing. Only a few people in the world, throughout history, received it by the will of the Lord, just like that, while everyone else has to work hard earning it. Of course, it is easier if there is someone to receive it from. However, what did we do to those who brought it here? Let's recall, friends. And why? Because it is sincere, true bliss It infuriates Shaitan, it burns him, and he's afraid of it. And he hates those carriers. He just hates them. Consciousness rages because it is painful for it and it is scared. Especially when this love is sent within you, my friend. Your Shaitan understands his doom, and he understands that when you receive this gift of God's love, by using it, you can gain life. Well, that means death for Shaitan. He doesn't want that. Therefore, it is denied. That is why, when people are given even more than they need, within 2 or 3 days they manage to give it all to Shaitan. And by converting this true love, Allat, into anti-Allat, into their desires and thoughts into stupidity, or simply into physical pleasure, they give it all away, and afterwards they themselves remain empty. Isn't that so? Well, a person should retain it. You should give back what you receive. That's when this river is generated. It is one, but it flows in various directions, and by sending a little stream, you receive a tremendous, full-flowing river in return. This is wonderful.
As you once said, the silver thread expands and the humanist personality
Of course, he becomes freer and freer,
closer
and with
to the
every
soul.
correctly performed practice, even if we perform it 5 or 10 times a day, it doesn't matter. Every time we become closer and closer. That's what practice is needed for replenishment, for coming closer to the spiritual world. But still, the door opens only at the moment of complete disconnection and only at the moment of sleep. Therefore, there's no need to be afraid of practices, my friends. They should be performed. And the practice where we force our consciousness, make it do what it doesn't want to do, well, that's not practice. You know, you need to generate love in yourself during the day and direct it to the spiritual world, inside yourself, to your soul, and be so sincere and honest first and foremost. Be righteous and not listen to Shaitan, and then a desire, an immense desire for practice will ignite in you, and then the practice will be successful. But while you have no desire for practice, while you do it at the level of physical training and exercise, I don't know, of something, some obligation, then any spiritual practice of yours turns into meditation at best, nothing more. Therefore, friends, attain love during the day, aspire, and this will be revealed to you. Meanwhile, you should begin with a simple thing, with love for each other. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you.
You know, we once asked you a question, what does the morning begin with? And you said, with dawn. Today we understand this word somehow in a new way, and I wish that this spiritual dawn would set in everyone's life.
It will, if you, friends, want that. But you should start with love for each other.
Thank you.
It is the closest and the shortest way to come to know eternal life, right? So friends, let's love each other. Thank you.